This afternoon we're going to interview Lynn Klingaman, who's been an integral part of our Ag Museum, and Lynn's worked very hard to get this museum up and going and spent a lot of time working on the inside of the structure. So we're going to ask Lynn some questions this afternoon, and so he can give us some of his vast knowledge of many different areas of farming. So first thing we'd like to do is let Lynn just kind of tell us a little bit about himself.
Well, first off, I was born in 1931 on a farm because a doctor came out and delivered me. At that time, my parents lived where Jimmy Waugh lives now, in the old house. And I have heard him tell that the doctor came out and delivered me $5. And so I was delivered at home. And so I guess that's where I started out at. And later on, my parents went to Michigan for 1 year. I don't remember because I was too young to remember much about that. But the first thing that I recall is living down here on the house that's up on the hill across the road from where Gren Holy Cross, or Ed Holy Cross at that time, lived. So I lived east of Larwell, and my parents worked for Harry Kitson, and something like $30 a month. And Dad got a better job. He ended up working. He worked at Glen Galloway's, was a strawberry farm. And as we progressed on that, Dad got quite a bit more pay for Glen Galloway, and he could have a house rent-free and a cow and a garden. And he worked for Galloway's for several years, and then in 1938, Dad moved over to New Lake, and my grandmother owned a farm, and we farmed a couple years. I don't know what the arrangements was, but about 1938, Dad moved over there, and I believe in 42, he wanted to buy the farm. And my grandmother thought that you ain't got money enough to buy a farm. Not like it was whole $6,000, you know. And so anyhow, Dad went through the FHA and got a loan, and he bought the farm, and we built a shed and a corn crib on the south side of the barn. And eventually that ended up almost like a feed mill as we got larger. We had a hammer mill and a mixer and scales and everything because we done our own feed preparation. And so anyhow, you had a question here, what do you consider the best years of your life and why? Well, I guess the simplest thing, when you're in high school, you got the world by the you-know-what, and I would say that's probably the best years of my life, and from there, after you got out of high school, I graduated in 1949, and after you got out of high school, you decided that you didn't know nothing, and and so on.
What high school did you graduate from?
I graduated from Larwell in 1949. And one good thing about it, we didn't have any shootings. As far as I know, nobody used drugs. And at least if they did, it was pretty discreet because then things just didn't occur. Mm-hmm. And but I would say then I went to the military in the fall of 52 and got out of the military in the fall of 55. And in the meantime, we farmed and we utilized Kent quite a little bit on haymaking and chore and so on. And so I guess that's kind of a run-up on what I did. And after I got out of the Army, I went back to farming, and eventually we dropped livestock and just grain farmed, and I built quite a number of grain bins and elevator legs and steel structures and so on for farmers and commercial also. And so anyhow, you talked here about how has farming changed in your lifetime. Well, we started out, I'm quoting as near as I can remember. Now, I did not farm with horses, but Dad had horses. And the only time I ever used the horses was mowing hay, and I hated it because you get plugged up, you know, mowers wasn't like they are today, and you get plugged up and you'd have to stop and clean off the sickle bar, and the horses wouldn't stand still. So you had to make sure you get your fingers out of the way because they'd step forward or step back or something, you know, and the sickle bar would go make a stroke or two. But anyhow, when I first started farming, I farmed with my dad up until I went to the military. And somebody's knocking.
Go on.
Huh?
Just go on.
All right. When did you start farming? Well, I started farming basically after I got out of the military in 52. And then they wanted to describe the machinery that you use when you started farming. The first tractor that Dad had was an International F14 with a single 16 mounted plow. And he bought that at public auction during World War II somewhere in Washington Township. And the way he got the tractors were, you bid it off at auction. They had your names in a bucket, and so they pulled out the bucket, or the name out of the bucket, and if you wanted a tractor for the bid price, you got the tractor. And you had to write a refusal, you know. But that's the way he got the first tractor. That was during World War II. And I think about probably 43 when he bought the tractor. And from then on later we bought, in the late 50s, the late 40s, Dad bought a International F20 down there at public auction by South Whitley somewhere. And he picked me up at school and I drove that thing home. And it would look like a humongous tractor compared to the F14, you know, and we used that for a number of years. And you described farm machinery when you started farming. Well, we started with tractors, single 16 plow. And if you drove from daylight till dark, you could get about 7.5 to 8 acres plowed. And at that time, everything had to be plowed, disc and harrowed again, and eventually you planted corn. And the first corn planter we had was a horse planter that we converted, just cut the tongue off and pulled it behind the tractor. And later we had a mounted International Harvester corn planter. It was mounted on the International H. And we used that for several years. And the most I ever planted at one time, down here we had 2 fields on this farm. That was a total of about 29, roughly 39 acres. Just a little under 40 acres. Supposed to rain, and I got up real early in the morning, and as soon as you could see, I started planting corn, and Quilla Barker came down and helped on the fertilizer because he didn't have much time to waste. And I got that 29 acres planted in one day. And that night it rained about 5 inches, but we were done. And so anyhow, the other thing that I wanted to make a statement about is wheat. And I have planted wheat with a 5-hole grain drill and standing corn. And I also have planted wheat with a regular grain drill where you cut the corn with a binder and shocked it, and you simply farmed around it till you got, you plant wheat in there around the shocks of corn. And that's an experience to plant corn with or wheat with a 5-hole grain drill. It ain't very fast. And so anyhow, I'm including some things from my dad's farm, but my dad's farm was 126 acres, and eventually we rented Levi Keister's farm, was another 80, and in 1948 Dad bought this farm where I live now, and incidentally he was born and raised here in the same location. Our house burned in 1966, and that was the old farmhouse that he was born and raised in. And so as time went on, we farmed more and more, and in the early 50s we was farming about roughly 350 acres with less than 60 horsepower as farmers' tractors. And but I've cut corn, I've shocked wheat. No, we didn't. Dad bought a little 42-inch combine, International Harvester, in 1947, I believe. And he was in the thrashing ring. And take that, Neil. And whoever it is, I'll call him back.
Hello.
But anyhow, that's how we handled that. Now, when Dad cut corn and shocked it, we had a Rosenthal corn shredder, and that was before we had a tractor. Well, how did you power this? We had an old Chevrolet car engine that you could buy a belt pulley for from Montgomery Ward's, and you could line it up and drive a couple stakes in the ground and pull it in tight with the come-along, or not, well, at that time a block and tackle, and held it tight in the belt. And
So what kind of tractors did you have then when you were farming?
well, later on,
Yeah.
all right, we farmed with the F20, the F14, then we went to International M diesels, and we had 2 of them. Dad bought them used, and then while I was in the military, these were getting to be high-hour tractors because the one tractor had over 7,000 hours and never been opened up. And so while I was in the military, Dad traded that in and bought a International 400 diesel, and we used that for, I don't know, about 6 years.
What kind
I
of
think.
horsepower did it have?
That was about 44 horse, somewhere in that vicinity. And they anyhow, later on, Dad traded in we had 2M diesels for several years, and he traded that in on a 560 International diesel at Huntington. And some people said the 560 was a piece of junk, but we got along very well with it. And incidentally, the 400 diesel that Dad bought new, he bought it at Warsaw, and that was the worst tractor ever owned. And Kent can verify that. We had whatever you could think of on a tractor has been off to fix something on it or underneath it. And Kent and I split the tractor one time, and the torque was leaking, and we fixed that, took it out, put it on the feed grinder, and ground a batch of feed and turned around and split the tractor again because we had rolled the oil seal and it was leaking oil worse than it was before, wasn't it, kid? And so anyhow, eventually we farmed up to, Dad and I farmed up to over about 350 acres, and that's when you plowed, disc, and harrowed, and had wheat and hay crops. We rotated on a year of corn and plant that to wheat and sow it to alfalfa or something of that type for a hay crop. And we basically run a 3-year rotation: corn, wheat, and hay crop. And you had down here how many acres in your first farm? Well, we farmed a total of, at that point in time in the early 50s, we was farming about 360 acres, 350, 360. And then I went to the military in the fall of 52, and I got back out in October of 55, and I went back to farming. And you had down here, what crops and animals did you have on your first farm? We raised quite a lot of hogs at that time, and I'm talking about farrowing them. You didn't buy the pigs, like you do today.
All right, we're going to do the second part of our interview with Lynn Klingaman, and so he's going to continue on from where he left off the first time.
Well, if I remember correctly, we was going to start on question number 7. Could you share with us some of the funny stories that happened on your farm? To me, I think one of the funniest things that occurred here, we built this farrowing house out here, and we didn't get it done before some sows farrowed. And so they farrowed, a couple of them farrowed in the woods. And we wanted to get them 2 sows up there into the farrowing crates. And we was working at it. Phil Hively come over, and Phil says, I can get that in there. And we opened the door and opened the gate on the farrowing crate, and Phil went back there in the woods and grabbed up one of the baby pigs, and the old sow was chasing him across the field. He was just running like mad, and the sow about 6 feet behind him. Right in the door they went, right in the farrowing crate. He dropped the pig in the farrowing crate and jumped around her and shut the door on the farrowing crate. And that always stuck in my mind that that was kind of a funny deal. And so that would pretty well take care of. That'd be just one story. We got lots of them, I suppose. But what was the cost of machinery when you started farming? That's a tough one. But I remember when we went from 2-row corn planter to a 4-row corn planter. I bought a John Deere 4-row corn planter, $650. And today you couldn't even buy the coulters on a modern corn planter. I think we bought a disc. The first disc that Dad had that was a tractor disc was Sears and Roebuck, and I think $285 or somewhere in that vicinity for a 8-foot disc with, and he had the option of, he had 14-inch blades or 16-inch blades, and Dad bought the 16-inch blades because they'd last longer. And so that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea on what the costs were, which was minuscule compared to today. And number 9 here, what did 1 acre of ground cost at the time? My dad purchased a farm over here on the south end of New Lake off my grandmother in 1940. And he moved there at 38 and rented the farm, and my grandmother, Dad wanted to buy it. And my grandmother, well, you don't have money enough to buy that. Well, Dad had had applied for an FHA loan. Now there's 126 acres at Dad's place, and $6,500. Bought the farm and enough lumber to build a shed and a corn crib on the south end of the barn. And so you figure out 6,500 or even 6,000, divided by 126 makes it pretty cheap. And this farm here where we're living today, Dad bought that in 1948, and he gave $92 an acre for it. And it had quite a bit of woods on it, not right in the middle of the farm. And in due course of time, we cut off that woods, and I remember about cutting that off because I was getting ready to go to the military. We cut off about 9 acres of woods with crosscut saw, and we wasn't quite done, and I had to go to the military. And the very next day, Dad bought a chainsaw, and that always kind of half peeled me, but he done me good because I was one of these tough, skinny, muscular farm kids. And I went in the military. I weighed 140 pounds, and in 8 weeks I was up to 165 pounds because I didn't work half as hard at basic training as I did here at home. But that'd give you some idea what ground cost, what that, I'm talking about the late 40s and very early 50s. And what was your first automobile, and how much did it cost? The first automobile I had was a senior in high school, and I bought a Pontiac coupe, and a straight 6-cylinder engine. And that gone car, I had so much trouble with it that it was 40 years later before I ever bought a Pontiac again. And my dad was adamant on this, but you got a car, you don't drive mine. And I had to go on a date. It'd take you the rest of the week to get the car cobbled up so you could go on another date again. And these Pontiac cars in the late 30s had a knee action suspension, and I had all kinds of trouble with that because that was on a threaded piece on the front axle that floated up and down with your knee action, and if that came off which it did a couple times for me, and they were threaded. And so what would happen if you put the brakes on and one of them happened to come off, that ripped your brake line in two, or flexible line, and didn't have no brakes. And I done that several times, and I finally done a farmer repair job on it. You could take the nut deal off of that, and I put a flat washer on there, a big flat washer, and just arc welded it fast, so it could still travel up and down, but it wouldn't fall off. And my second automobile, that wasn't in there, but I traded this in, or sold it, and I traded in, I bought a 1930 Chevrolet sedan that was very low mileage, and I think I gave $100 for that. And I drove that for a couple years, and I got the big head and got a newer car, and I sold my old car for the old Chevrolet for the same price I paid for it. I sold it to Jim Gillette, and he drove it for a couple years. And my next question down here, what were average yields for crops, and what crops did you plant? Well, at that point in time, we had livestock and cattle, and so we had a corn, wheat, and hay rotation on a 3-year basis. And the wheat, we just simply fed to the hogs, ground it and fed it to the hogs. I don't think Dad ever sold any wheat, and mixed it with corn and fed it to the hogs. And my dad in 10 acres on the, or 11 acres on the south end of New Lake is a muck piece, and this would have been in 1948, I believe, that he had Dad always planted DeKalb seed corn, and DeKalb had a thing on yield monitoring, you know, and Dad had a yield, you know how they went out and measured and weighed it in a basket and so on. He had a yield of 128 bushel the acre, and that was almost unheard of in the late 40s. And we had at that point in time, we had a 22B International mounted corn planter on F20, and we had a terrible time picking corn in there because the picker wasn't designed to handle that much corn, and you'd have to go about 30 feet and stop and clean it out, or let it run and clean all up, and then you'd go another 30 feet. And the funny part of that is Dad caught the tractor on fire, which happened fairly often at farms at that point in time, and it burned off about just a flash fire through the corn stalks. We saved the tractor, but we got up to the house and got that put out, and in the meantime the corn stalks was burning back there, and we rushed back there and got that put out. And when we went back to picking again, Dad said we should have burnt the whole darn field, because you get the part of the shucks is burned and most of the leaves is burnt off, and you'd go right along picking corn. And I never forgot that. But then on wheat, Dad was in a thrashing ring, and the last year that he was in a thrashing ring, he got a 28 bushel the acre was the top yield on the thrashing ring. And Dad had 28 bushel the acre. And that was cut and shocked and ran through a thrashing machine. And the next year, Dad, this would have been about 1947, Dad sold his share in the thrashing ring and bought a used International Harvester 42-inch combine. But that was a lot better than thrashing. And if you could combine 10 acres a day in a big day if weather was right and humidity was down and on and on and on. But today that people talk about 42-foot combines, and Dad's was 42-inch. And did you raise enough food and animals on the farm to feed your family, and what did you raise? Well, like I said, we raised on animals. We had butchered the beef and butchered the hog as we needed it, and we had plenty of food. And my mom, during World War II, they had a organization that kept track of how many cans of fruit they done and how many tomatoes and how many bushel of potatoes and so on. And the folks actually raised some cabbage, cabbage and celery. We had celery on the muck ground, that not a lot, but twice the size of this house, you know. We raised celery. And one other thing that I thought of, that when we butchered one time, it was shortly after World War II, we butchered a hog. It was cold weather, and we had ground the sausage and put it in casing, and the casing was pretty much my job to get that going, but you used a hog intestine, and you took the garden hose and flushed the crap out of the intestine, and you scraped the outside with a dull table knife, and then you took water and the garden hose, and you could invert this and get the outside inside. And then you scraped that again so you had a real thin casing. Well, anyhow, we done that, stuffed them with sausage, and Mom had it coiled up in a wash tub and sitting outdoors, and they'd put a lid over it. And they went somewhere, come back, and daggone old sow had got out and was eating that sausage. And Mom was about ready to kill that hog and start all over again. But along that line, back up here to this funny stories, we had an old sow fell in the well pit one time, and we had a windmill there, boards, you know, across the well pit, and boards broke, and she fell down in that, only about 6 feet, I suppose. And how do you get a sow out of a hole that's only about 4 foot square on the inside? And we had a windmill there, and Dad put a couple planks across the framework of the windmill, and we got the sow. She couldn't go nowhere, so I put a rope around her hind quarters, a rope around her front quarters, and pulled her up out of there with block and tackle, put the boards back on, and let the sow loose. But she wasn't too happy hanging on ropes there. That really stuck in my mind. That was kind of funny looking thing, an old sow hanging on 2 ropes, and so I would say we had plenty of food on the farm, and for the farm and animals and ourselves, and so I think that would pretty well take care of that. What did 1 bag of seed corn cost? I'm talking about DeKalb seed corn, and if I remember correctly, a bag of seed corn, DeKalb seed corn, was about $35 for a bushel. Then later, you had to pay a little more than that, but you only got 60,000 kernels. And today, the price of seed corn is way above that. And then my last question here, did you farm with horses? And I've got a couple stories on that. I never personally farmed with horses, with the exception that I mowed hay one time with a team of horses. And I hated that because the sickle bar, the faster they walked, the faster they wanted to go, and you had to keep the horses reined in pretty tight, or they act like they wanted to run away, you know. And also, on the horses, probably very few people in Whitley County done this, but I've actually planted wheat with one horse in a 5-hole grain drill and standing corn. And I still have the grain drill out here. And it's International Harvester grain drill. And one other thing I want to tell you about the horses, the team that Dad had that we used a lot was the first team that I remember. And we built several things on the farm there, so Dad loaded up logs and took them over here on State Road 109 and had them cut up in lumber. But you roll them up 2 planks or skids like Galen has down there in the museum. And of course you had to keep the log square and jerk it around. And Dad would be on one side to load where the log was at and get up, whoa. And the horse would take about 1 step and Dad would straighten up the log again, get up, whoa, no louder than I'm talking right now. And but our second team that Dad had, we didn't use very much. And them things you had to chase down with. We had an old, what we called a hootenanny tractor, made out of Model A Ford sedan that had the back end crashed on it, put a truck rear axle on it, and no body on it except the hood and windshield. And we used that for several years because you could really haul. It's good for hauling because you could go 25, 30 mile an hour with that thing pretty easily. And the horse deal on our second team that Dad had that I recall was not used a lot. And if you wanted to use the horses for something, you had to take this old hootenanny tractor and go back in a pasture field and just literally run them suckers back and forth till you got them in the lane, and of course they'd go up to the barn then. But I hated that because they'd want to stomp on you or lean against you when you put harness on. And Dad eventually, on a late, well, just shortly after World War II, Dad bought an F-14 tractor at public auction, and that was the end of the horses. And later, late, about 47, he bought a F-20 tractor down here, a sale near South Whitley, and I was in high school, and I thought, boy, that was the world's biggest tractor. Dad hauled me down there after school, and I drove that thing home. And it had road gear in it, about 8 mile an hour. And so I drove that tractor from South Whitley over to my dad's. And so that's getting away from the horse thing. But the last time I remember Dad using the horses, we planted a field across from where Nub's barn is now, Nub was barn. And 15 acres in that, 2-row horse-drawn corn planter. And Dad was planting away, and of course I hadn't worked the horses very much. And we had rented this ground off of Levi Keister. And Levi come over, Dad was about half doing on this field. Well, you're working them horses kind of hard, aren't you? Dad said, they had it all winter to rest. And so, anyhow, I think that's about the end of my ramblings here, but I had a good life on the farm. I learned how to work, and I think that this is kind of ad-libbing in there, but I think the greatest gift that parents can give to a kid is a good work ethic. And I remember Glenn Holycross thought my dad was overworking me. Well, I didn't even know any difference. You done what you was supposed to do and go on. And during high school, Dad would pick corn. We had several wagons, and as soon as I got home from school, he'd shovel off his corn, and might have 5 wagon loads there to shove off, but that's just what we did. You know, we didn't think anything about it. And can you think anything else I need to?
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the winter you spent at the Ag Museum, where you actually built the loft, and to tell us a little bit about your experience there, and what all you did, and how you planed down all those boards. And
the loft in the Ag building, now the Ag building was built by Mike Grunert, and so I had nothing to do with the actual building of the building. Then after the building was up, we thought we needed a loft in there, and I went to Holmes Lumber Company, and I had just a paper sketch of this, what I wanted to do, and a list of what lumber we'd need. And Holmes says, I think we can accommodate you on that. So I figured they gave us about $5,000 worth of white oak timbers. And when we put up this loft, the actual framing on the loft, I cut most of that myself, and it was rough sawed, you know, and so I bought a good belt sander, and you just sanded this lightly, and that's the way it is today. And it was never run through a planer. And then when we put the floor joist in, one end went against the building wall, and the other end was on strap hangers. Well, the strap hangers you buy are made for modern lumber, which is 1 5/8 inch, and they wouldn't fit this 2-inch oak planks. So we cut them and bored holes and used 2 pieces and overlapped it so you drive your nails through both pieces. And but Holmes furnished all the oak lumber in there. And then on the side walls, Galen Wilkinson furnished boards that he'd had for 10, 15, 20 years, and we set up a planer, a tractor right in the building there, planed all these wainscoting boards and stuff that went on the south end of the building, and the side walls, the east side has a wainscoting about 40 inches tall, and that was wild cherry and so on. And but everybody worked together. We got the thing accomplished, and I think it was a great project. And I don't regret my time I spent down there working on that. We worked down there. It was pretty cold, and I think that my wife thought I was going to make a professional job out of that, but we worked down there till spring, you know, inside the building, no heat, but we got the building accomplished, and I think it's a asset to the 4-H grounds today.
So it's an asset to the community too.
Yeah.
And there's you worked there about 6 months, did you?
Yeah, almost 6 months. I worked down there probably 4 to 5 days a week.
Yeah. Name some of the guys that worked down there with you.
All right, Galen Wilkinson and Don Gross and Kyler, what's his, the one there, I can't even say his name now, had the planer.
Oh, Kenny Carrick.
Yeah, Kenny Carrick.
Yeah.
Furnished a planer, and he worked on it quite a bit. And Phil Hostler helped quite a bit. And then when we got down, we got the building built and got all the wainscoting in. The north wall is drywall, and we was to put a mural in there. And I wanted Beth Darley to do the mural in the worst kind of way, and finally got that accomplished. And the mural is still there today, and I hope it stays there for many years, because it was, she painted that mural. She worked on there just about a month, and she actually got paid less than the people that painted the base coat on the wall. But she done all this by hand, and she was worried about the arc that we have in there where it says Willie County Ag Museum and 4-H Learning Center. She was wondering how to do that, and that's simple. And so I took chalk and a string and an 8-penny nail and drove it in one of them cracks in the cement there on the floor where they had a cut line, and I made an arc. He wanted it so far, so we went out. That's about 30 feet across, so whatever the footage was. So he went half that distance, and I made the arc out here on the floor, and that gave him a pattern to go by. Yeah, so that's what we did on that.
Yeah, I think it's 60 feet wide, and that mural is still probably one of the largest murals in Willie County.
Yeah.
And it's it's still very attractive.
Yeah.
Along with all the rest of the building.
I hope it stays there for many years, because Beth worked hard on that thing. That was the largest mural that she'd ever painted, and we had through the board of directors and so on, they had given me permission. We had a general idea what we wanted. So we started from left where they was clearing the ground, clear to the right where he was farming moderate, and various stages in between. And so I assisted on that quite a little bit because Beth didn't know what we wanted. Well, she was painting and I was scrounging up stuff for her to look at for ideas and so on. And I remember one thing down here. So he shows a car on a street, and this happened to be a Chevy car. And I spent quite a bit of time looking for a picture that showed this car on the passenger side. Nearly all pictures of cars is on the driver's side. And if you look at that, it's heading east, and you're looking at the passenger side of the vehicle. And so we progressed up to modern day. So it's kind of a scenario from early days to modern days.
Well, I think one of the neatest things, you took some pictures of actually homes and farms and trucks in Willie County and gave them to Beth.
Yeah.
And then she'd transfer them, she'd look at them and paint them up on the wall.
Yeah.
And she's very skilled. She just take a picture and look at it, and she'd paint it up there.
She didn't scale out anything, just did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is there anything else you think of?
No, I can't think of anything else. It sounds like, I think you've covered it pretty well.
Yeah.
You've got a pretty good resume here. So, but we want to thank you, Lynn, for all the work you've done in that museum. If you spent a lot of hours in there in that winter putting that loft up and putting the siding up and helping get the mural done. But I think it's all been worthwhile. It's a very, quite an asset to not only the 4-H grounds, but Willie County in general, because people come down there, really appreciate the building and they have all kinds of reunions and business meetings, things and birthday parties and everything there. So it's used quite a bit. So thank you very much, Lynn. So that concludes our interview. So thank you again for all your work, what you've done for the museum.